had always believed that family was everything. Growing up, my parents instilled in us the importance of hard work, loyalty, and staying close to one another. I had two siblings, my older brother, Mark, and my younger sister, Lily. We weren't perfect, but we were a tight-knit unit. At least that was what I thought. I had always worked hard to live up to my parents' expectations. I studied hard in school, got a decent job after graduating, and did my best to make them proud. While Mark and Lily had their own lives, I had always been the dependable one, the one who stayed close to home, helped with family matters, and made sure our parents were well taken care of. My mindset was simple. I would work hard, save, and eventually inherit what my parents had built. A modest house, a few savings, and the sense of security that came with having a family legacy. But everything changed the day I got the call. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when I received the news. My parents had passed away suddenly in a car accident. It was a shock, a gut-wrenching blow that left me speechless. I never had the chance to say goodbye. The grief was suffocating at first. I was lost, drowning in the flood of emotions, and I leaned heavily on Mark and Lily for support. The funeral was the first time I had seen my siblings in months. Mark had been living across the country with his family, and Lily had just moved back into town. We were all in the same place again, and in that moment it felt like maybe we could get back to the way things used to be. But little did I know, the real shock was waiting for me after the funeral was over. A few weeks later, I sat down with the lawyer to go over the details of my parents' will. Mark and Lily were there too, looking just as nervous as I felt. I had expected the usual, the house, some financial assets, maybe a few heirlooms. I had been quietly preparing myself for the possibility of taking over the family home. But when the lawyer read the will, my world shattered. To my son, Mark, I leave the family home and all associated assets, the lawyer read aloud. To my daughter, Lily, I leave the rest of our financial savings, including all investments. I blinked. I didn't hear the next part of what the lawyer said. I was too busy replaying the words in my head, trying to understand what had just happened. My parents had given my inheritance to Mark and Lily, everything. The house, the savings, the investments. It was all theirs. I sat in stunned silence. I didn't know how to react. Why had they done this? Why had they left me out completely? Mark and Lily both turned to me. Lily looked apologetic, but Mark's expression was unreadable. He was always the more practical one, the one who always made the decisions without asking anyone else's opinion. But this was something else. Look, I know this is a shock, Mark said, breaking the silence, but Mom and Dad were clear about it. They wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family, and since I have a family of my own, they thought it would be better for me to take it. I wanted to say something, but the words caught in my throat. This wasn't just about the house. It was about everything. The sacrifices I had made, the years of being there when they needed me, the moments when I put my dreams aside to help them. It all felt like it had been for nothing. Lily chimed in, her voice soft. It's not that we don't care about you, but, well, you've always had your own life. I think they thought you'd be okay without it. Couldn't believe it. My own parents had passed away and left me with nothing. I had always assumed I'd be the one to inherit. I had always assumed that, because I had been there for them, I would be the one to receive what they had built. But now it was all going to Mark and Lily. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't understand. How could they do this to me? I asked, my voice shaky. I've always been here for them. And now, nothing? Mark's face softened, but there was no real remorse in his eyes. Look, I know it's hard, but they made their decision. We can't change that now. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. How could they just sit there acting like this was normal? It felt like I was being erased from the family's story. The betrayal stung more than I expected. My parents had chosen Mark and Lily over me, and I was left with nothing. I left the lawyer's office without saying another word. I needed time to think, to process this. But deep down, I knew something had changed, something irreversible. I spent the next few weeks in a haze. The house was gone, and I was left with nothing but the feeling of emptiness. Every time I saw Mark and Lily, I felt a mix of resentment and confusion. How could they not understand how I felt? How could they not see the years of dedication I had given to this family? I tried to keep busy, pouring myself into my job and avoiding my family. But the truth was, I had no idea what to do next. I had always planned on building a future around my inheritance, but now that future had crumbled to dust. And then, one evening, as I sat in my apartment, I made a decision. If I wasn't going to get the inheritance, then I would build something of my own. I would create a future that didn't rely on anyone else's generosity. And that was exactly what I did. The days following the revelation about the inheritance were a blur. At first, I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, betrayal, and confusion. I had spent so much of my life believing in the idea of family duty, the unspoken agreement that I would be there when needed, and that the sacrifices would eventually be acknowledged. But now all of that felt meaningless. My parents had made their choice, and I was left to figure out how to move forward with nothing. In the days that followed, I oscillated between self-pity and frustration. I wanted to lash out at Mark and Lily, to make them understand how deeply I had been hurt. But every time I saw them, I felt more and more detached from them. They acted as if nothing had changed, as if I should just accept their inheritance and move on. But I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't want to live my life depending on anyone else. I didn't want to be bitter, but I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. It was late one night when the idea hit me: why not build my own future? If I wasn't going to get an inheritance, then I would create my own success. I had always been a hard worker, and I had a good head on my shoulders. I'd spent my entire life following the rules, getting a stable job, saving money, being there for my family, but it was clear that the system I had followed wasn't going to work for me anymore. So I decided to break free. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of clarity. I wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for myself. I was going to build something, and I wasn't going to wait for anyone's approval or help. It was time to start my own business. I had always been interested in design, and over the years I taught myself how to use software and build websites. I loved the idea of creating something from scratch, of turning a blank canvas into a finished product. I had worked in a corporate job for a while, but it never felt fulfilling. The idea of building something that was mine, that I had created through my own efforts, excited me. It was risky, but I knew I had to take the leap. The first step was to put together a business plan. I had no savings to fall back on, and I wasn't sure how I was going to manage, but I knew that I had to start somewhere. I began by researching everything: marketing strategies, business models, and financial projections. I spent countless hours learning about starting a small business, reading articles, watching YouTube tutorials, and talking to people in the industry. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I didn't have the luxury of a huge investment, so I started small. I began by offering freelance design services online. I created a profile on freelance platforms and started bidding on projects. The first few months were tough. I didn't land many jobs, and the ones I did get didn't pay much. But I kept pushing forward, refining my skills, and building my portfolio. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. I had a few lucky breaks along the way. A client who was impressed by my work referred me to another, and soon I had a steady stream of projects coming in. My reputation grew and my confidence soared. I realized that I was no longer just trying to survive. I was building something real, and it felt incredible. But with success came new challenges. I had to learn how to manage my time effectively, how to handle clients, how to navigate the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. There were days when I felt overwhelmed and wondered if I had made a huge mistake. But every time I considered quitting, I thought back to that moment when I had made the decision to take control of my future. Couldn't give up now. As my business continued to grow, I started to experience a shift in my mindset. I wasn't just an employee anymore, I was the boss. I was in charge of my own destiny, and that was a powerful feeling. I began to realize that I didn't need my family's approval, and I didn't need their inheritance. My success would be my own, and that was enough. But as my business grew, so did the pressure from Mark and Lily. They started to reach out more frequently, asking for advice or financial help. At first, I didn't think much of it. They were family, after all. But as time went on, their requests grew more frequent and more demanding. It was clear that they saw me as a safety net. "Hey, can you help me out with a loan?" Mark asked one day. "I'm in a bit of a bind. You know, things have been tight with the house, and I could really use some help." I hesitated. My first instinct was to say yes, to help him out like I always had. But something inside me stopped me. Why should I help him after everything that had happened? He had received the inheritance, and I was the one who had built something from scratch. This wasn't about being petty. It was about setting boundaries. "I'm not sure, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been working hard to get my business off the ground, and I can't afford to lend money right now. I'm sure you understand." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I get it," Mark said, his tone sounding more disappointed than I had expected. "But you've got your business now, and things seem to be going well. I thought you'd want to help out." "I'm doing this on my own, Mark," I said, feeling a sense of finality. "I can't keep bailing you out. You've got to figure things out on your own." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty, but another part of me felt liberated. I wasn't going to let their expectations dictate my life anymore. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't about to give that up just to appease them. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my decision was the right one. I had spent so many years trying to live up to my family's expectations, always putting their needs above my own. But now, for the first time in my life, I was living for myself. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. As the months went by, my business continued to grow. I started to get more high-profile clients, and my income steadily increased. What had begun as a side hustle to prove to myself that I could build something on my own had now turned into a thriving business. It was exhilarating, but it was also incredibly stressful. There were days when it felt like everything was happening at once. New projects, new clients, and the constant pressure to keep delivering. It was a world away from the stability of my old job, but I couldn't have been happier. But as my success grew, so did the tension with my family. Mark and Lily, especially Mark, seemed to think that because I was doing well now, I should somehow share the wealth. I had always been the reliable one, the one they could call when they needed help. But now I was starting to push back, and they weren't happy about it. One afternoon, I received a message from Lily. It was brief, but to the point. "Can you send me some money for the kids' school fees? We're a little short this month, and I thought maybe you could help out." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how to respond. It wasn't the first time Lily had asked for financial help, but this time, something felt different. I had worked so hard to get where I was, and it seemed like they thought I was just a bank they could dip into whenever they needed it. I had always been the one to give. I had always been the one who showed up for everyone, even when it meant neglecting my own needs. But now I was learning to say no. I had to, for my own well-being, for the sake of the business I had built. I typed out a response, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send. "I'm sorry, Lily, but I can't help this time. I've been working hard to keep my business afloat, and I need to prioritize my own financial goals. I hope you understand." As soon as I sent the message, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I being too harsh? Was I selfish? But then I remembered the decision I had made months ago. I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me anymore. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my own dreams for the sake of others. The message I received back from Lily was short and to the point. "Fine. I guess I'll figure it out on my own." The coldness in her reply stung, but I refused to let it affect me. I had made my decision, and I knew it was the right one. Later that week, Mark called me. This time, his tone was more serious than usual. "Hey, I've been thinking about what you said," Mark began, his voice low. "I get it, you're busy with your business, and you're trying to make it work. But I've got to be honest. I think you're being a little selfish. We've always been there for you, and now that you're doing well, you can't even help out." My heart rate spiked as I listened to his words. I had been expecting this. I had always known that once I started saying no, there would be pushback. But hearing it from Mark, hearing him accuse me of being selfish, felt like a gut punch. I've helped you out for years, Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've done everything I could to support you and the family. But I'm building something now. I can't keep giving and giving without taking care of myself. I'm not going to sacrifice my future just to make everyone else comfortable. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Mark processing what I had said. I understand that you've worked hard, he finally replied. But you can't just shut us out because you're successful now. Family is family. Family is family, Mark, I said, my voice firm now. But family doesn't get to take advantage of each other. You and Lily have had everything handed to you. I've had to fight for everything I have. I'm not going to let you take that away from me. There was another long silence before Mark spoke again. I don't know what to say to that, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. I guess I thought you'd be there for us, like you always have been. I've been there for you, Mark, I replied, my tone unwavering. But I'm not your safety net anymore. I've built my own life and I need to focus on that. The conversation ended on a sour note, and I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no going back. I knew my siblings wouldn't understand. They had always relied on me to bail them out, to help them when things got tough. But now I was no longer going to be the one they turned to for help. I had my own life to build, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. As the days passed, I kept moving forward with my business. I took on more clients, expanded my services, and began to build a reputation for myself in the industry. It wasn't easy, but it was rewarding. I had no one to rely on but myself, and that was exactly how I wanted it. But the tension with my family continued to grow. Mark and Lily stopped calling as often, and when they did, it was clear that things had changed between us. They no longer saw me as the dependable sibling they could count on. They saw me as someone who had turned her back on them. It hurt, but I knew I was doing the right thing. One evening, as I was wrapping up work for the day, I received a call from Lily. This time, her voice was softer than usual. I don't know if I was clear before, she said, her tone almost apologetic. But I just wanted to say, I'm sorry if I came across as entitled. I guess I just didn't know how to ask for help without feeling ashamed. You've always been the one to help us, and I guess I expected that to keep going. I paused, taking in her words. It wasn't easy to hear, but it was the first step towards mending things. Lily, I'm not mad at you, I said, my voice gentle. I just need you to understand that I can't keep doing everything for everyone. I've worked too hard to get where I am. I understand, she replied quietly. I'll figure things out on my own from now on. But I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. It's okay. Just remember, I'm here if you need advice. But I can't keep giving money or resources. I'm focusing on my future now, and I need you to do the same. We said our goodbyes, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a start. The road ahead was still uncertain, and my relationship with my family would never be the same. But I was no longer afraid to live for myself. The months that followed were difficult, but they were also transformative. My business continued to thrive, and each new success felt like a victory, a reminder of how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was truly living. My confidence grew with every project I completed, and I realized how much I had underestimated my own abilities. But despite the outward signs of success, there was an ongoing internal struggle. My relationship with my family, especially Mark and Lily, continued to strain. Though they had initially backed off after our tough conversations, I could sense the lingering tension every time we spoke. It wasn't like it used to be, lighthearted, comfortable, and filled with shared memories. Instead, there was an unspoken distance between us that neither of us seemed willing to bridge. One Saturday afternoon, I received a message from Mark. It was simple, but it carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. Can we talk? I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I think I owe you an apology. At first, I hesitated. Was this genuine? Was it a ploy to get me to help them again? But something in my gut told me that perhaps this was the beginning of the reconciliation I had been hoping for. Maybe Mark was finally ready to understand where I was coming from. I agreed to meet him at a cafe downtown. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a corner booth, stirring his coffee with a distracted expression. He looked up as I approached, his eyes weary but not defensive. I sat down across from him, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice quiet but sincere. I've been thinking about everything, about the inheritance, about how I acted, about all the times I've taken you for granted. And honestly, I'm ashamed. I should have never expected you to just keep giving. I've always relied on you, but you're right. It's not fair. You've worked hard for everything you have, and I shouldn't have treated you like you owed me something. His words caught me off guard. I had been preparing for some form of pushback, for him to justify his actions. But instead, he was acknowledging his mistakes. It was the first time in years that I truly felt like he saw me. Not as someone who was always there to fix things, but as someone with their own life, their own dreams. I wasn't trying to be unfair, Mark continued, his voice thick with emotion. I guess I just took it for granted that you'd always come through for me. But I see now that I need to be more independent. I need to stop leaning on you and figure things out on my own. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to say that it was too late, that the damage had been done and couldn't be undone. But another part of me wanted to believe that people could change, that relationships could heal, if both sides were willing to put in the work. You're right, I said finally. I did work hard to get where I am, and I don't regret it. But it's not about the money. It's about respect. I need you to understand that I can't keep putting everyone else's needs before my own. I've spent too much of my life doing that, and it's time for me to focus on my future. Mark nodded slowly. I get that now. I really do. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry. I've been so caught up in my own problems that I didn't consider what it was doing to you. But I want to make it right, and I'm going to do better. There was a long pause, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine sense of relief. This wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild our relationship, not based on expectations or obligations, but on mutual respect. We talked for a while longer, mostly about the business I had built and how things were going. Mark asked for advice, and I gave it freely, not out of obligation, but because I wanted him to succeed. The conversation felt more balanced now, less strained. When we parted ways, I felt lighter than I had in months. The next few weeks were a turning point. Mark and I continued to communicate, but things were different now. He wasn't constantly asking for help or trying to pull me into his financial struggles. Instead, he began to take more responsibility for his own life, and I began to see the change in him. He started a new job, and he was more proactive about dealing with his finances. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for Lily, I took a more cautious approach. She hadn't reached out as much, and I wasn't sure where things stood between us. But one day, out of the blue, she called me. Her voice was tentative, but there was a sincerity in it that I hadn't heard before. I've been thinking about everything too, she said, and I want to apologize for how I acted. I shouldn't have expected you to just keep helping me out, especially when you were working so hard. I didn't think about how that might have made you feel. I'm sorry. I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice, and I felt a shift in my heart. Maybe we weren't going to be the same people we were before, but perhaps we could find a new way to relate to each other. One that didn't involve me always being the one to carry the weight. I appreciate that, Lily, I said, my voice steady but warm. I just need you to understand that I can't keep putting everyone else before myself. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I need to focus on my business right now. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here if you need advice, or if you just want to talk. There was a long pause before Lily spoke again. I get it, and I respect that. I'm going to work on being more independent too. I don't want to keep relying on you. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. I could tell that both Mark and Lily were starting to understand what I had been trying to communicate all along. That I wasn't a safety net for them to fall into, but a person with my own life, my own ambitions, and my own boundaries. As the months went on, things continued to improve. My business flourished, and I found that I was more at peace than I had been in years. The tension with my family had not completely disappeared, but it had lessened. I had set clear boundaries, and they were slowly starting to respect them. I realized that building my own life wasn't just about creating a successful business. It was about creating a new dynamic with the people I loved. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of tension, but I knew that I had done what was necessary for my own well-being. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had created a future that was entirely my own. As the year progressed, I continued to see the fruits of my hard work. My business kept growing, and with each new project, I felt more confident in my abilities. I had created something real, something I could be proud of. But with that pride came a deep sense of responsibility, not just to my clients or to my business, but to myself. I had done what I had set out to do. I had built a life that was mine, free from the expectations of others. But there were still moments when I felt the weight of my family's expectations, especially when it came to Mark and Lily. It wasn't that they had become dependent on me again, but they were still trying to find their place in my new reality. I could see that they were trying, but there were moments when I wondered if they truly understood the sacrifices I had made to get to this point. One evening, I received a call from Mark. His voice was calm but tinged with an unfamiliar apprehension. "Hey, I wanted to tell you something," he began. "I've been working on my own finances like I said I would, and I think I've finally gotten to a place where I can stand on my own 2 feet. But I still need some advice, maybe even a little help with some business ideas. I hope that's okay." I was silent for a moment, processing his words. Mark had always been the one who took the easy way out, always relying on others to fix his problems. To hear him say he was standing on his own 2 feet was a huge step forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was something I could respect. "I'm glad to hear that, Mark," I said, my voice steady but warm. "It's good to see you taking control of your own life. As for advice, I'm here when you need it. But just remember, this is your journey now. I've been where you are, and I know how tough it can be. But you've got this." We talked for a while longer, and by the end of the conversation, I felt something shift between us. It wasn't just the tension that had existed for so long. There was a genuine understanding between us now. Mark wasn't asking for handouts anymore. He was asking for guidance, and that was something I could offer on my terms. A few days later, Lily called me. Her tone was softer than before, and there was an unfamiliar humility in her voice. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "and I realized that I haven't been fair to you. I've always relied on you to bail me out when things got tough, and I never really thought about how that might affect you. I know you've had to work hard to get where you are, and I respect that. I'm sorry." I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened to her words. It wasn't an easy thing for Lily to say. Admitting that she had taken me for granted wasn't something she liked to do. But I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and that meant more to me than she would ever know. "I appreciate that, Lily," I said, my voice a little quieter than usual. "I know it's hard to break old habits, but we both need to focus on our own lives now. I've set boundaries for a reason, and it's important that we both respect that. But I'm still here for you. I can't keep helping financially, but if you need guidance or advice, you know where to find me." Lily was quiet for a moment, and I could tell she was processing what I had said. "I understand," she finally replied, "and I'm going to do better. I don't want to keep relying on you. I need to figure things out on my own." I could feel the weight lifting from both of us as we spoke. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and I knew that things would never be exactly like they were before. But there was a sense of peace that came with knowing that we had reached a new understanding. We were both growing, both trying to find our way in the world, and that was something I could support. As time went on, my relationship with Mark and Lily continued to evolve. There were still moments of tension, but they were fewer and farther between. We had all learned to respect each other's boundaries, and that made all the difference. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that was enough. And as for me, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I had never known before. I had built a business from the ground up, fought for my independence, and created a life that was truly my own. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had learned that it wasn't just about financial success. It was about creating a life that aligned with my values and my goals. It was about setting boundaries, taking control of my future, and never apologizing for the choices I made along the way. There were still challenges ahead, of course. No journey is without its obstacles. But I knew that I had the strength to face whatever came my way, because I had proven to myself that I could stand on my own, that I could create something meaningful with my own two hands. And that, more than anything else, was what mattered. In the end, the story wasn't just about inheritance or money. It was about growth, independence, and the courage to choose yourself over everything else. It was about understanding that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to say no, not just to others, but to yourself. It was about learning that you don't have to keep giving away pieces of yourself to make others happy. You can create your own happiness on your own terms. And that's exactly what I did.